order the Portland Parks Board meeting. Michelle, if you can give us a roll call.
Yes. Roll call. Corbin,
Present.
Ally, Casey,
Here.
David. Let's see. Chris, present. Adrian, here. Aaron,
Here.
Lena is absent. Swen,
Yep.
Abby, here. Bill, I do not see. Allison,
Present.
Samir,
Present.
and Jessica Green is absent.
That's everybody. And do we have any public comments?
We do. We have Megan Stefik, who was here last month. Megan, I will allow you to speak, and then you will have 2 minutes to give public comment. Whenever you're ready, Megan.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Last week, some of you may know, the Portland Public Schools Administration directed the design committees for the Cleveland High School and Wells High School modernizations to pause their work and to pause community engagement with the goal of scrutinizing costs and freeing up funds. Specifically for Cleveland High School, they're looking at a target cost savings of $108 million. Cleveland High School supporters are genuinely concerned that students and staff will get shortchanged, given construction costs have been on the rise, and that the Cleveland community will not get a fair and equitable modernization. We are waiting to see what design elements get cut and then what remains that meets the district's education specs, and we'll see that hopefully next week. We are concerned, though, that even if the bond gets approved and the project moves forward, there will come a time when additional cost savings will be needed and that athletic fields will get postponed, which did in fact occur with several of the past Portland Public Schools high schools. In follow-up to last month's meeting on November 12th, Director Long sent us a note letting us know that the Deputy City Administrator's Office is in the process of scheduling a meeting with PPS to discuss Powell Park. I hope you will invite community members to attend. There's several of us that would love to participate. I urge you to find a mutually beneficial solution, such as a long-term lease at Powell Park to Cleveland High School, similar to the 30-year lease between Parks and Rec and Grant High School. During a time when all options are on the table, I'm urging you to look at using your system development charges and consider using those to create multi-use turf field at Powell Park. We really hope that you will support the Cleveland community by improving Powell Park for our young athletes to thrive and supporting families in Southeast Portland by investing in our neighborhood, our neighborhood in 2025. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any others for public comment?
That is all.
All right, thank you so much. Moving to general announcements. Chris, go ahead.
The Friends and Allies Summit Steering Committee that is hosted by the Portland Parks Foundation is looking for another representative. I've served on this committee for the last 2 years to help them plan summits with their community. They have 2 summits a year, and they also do awards for Park Champion awardees in the springtime. It's a really great way to connect with other orgs in the community doing this community work. So if anyone is interested in serving on the committee as a Portland Parks and Board representative, please feel free to talk to me about it, and I would encourage you to apply.
Thank you, Chris. Any other announcements? Online, Michelle?
Do not, although I was gonna mention the PGE 10 letter.
Okay, I thought I was going to do it later.
Oh, we can.
Yeah, but this is a good time. you looked in your board packet, you saw the Harbison letter. If there's any additions or thoughts that you want to include, I believe this is gonna be presented in January as public testimony. So if you can send, again, any suggestions or additions my way or Ally's way, that'll be great. And like, if I can hold space for like 5 minutes, if there's anything that anybody wants to say about it right now, we can incorporate it into the notes. Go ahead and send it on Ally's way and CC me if you have any additions. If you haven't had a chance to read the letter, please do so. And I want to thank that group for compiling and putting together a strong letter, so thank you. Great, moving forward to approve November meeting minutes. Do we have anybody want to move forward to approve?
I will note Casey made a correction that he was not the one that made the motion for October meeting minutes. I re-listened to the recording last month, and I believe it might have been Samir that gave the motion. Yes, okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a second. Any discussions? Question items on all those who are voting to approve the meeting minutes? Oh, but there's a couple hands.
Oh, just to.
Oh, to approve, all those who approve, please raise your hand.
Chris, I imagine you're abstaining due to absence.
Okay, any abstentions?
I'm assuming David and Casey are not abstaining, or you are.
They're
No,
just
okay.
slow. They're
Yeah.
just slow on putting their hands down.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I was
Like I
slow
said.
on the uptake, sorry.
And Adrian, I don't believe you voted one way or the other.
Adrian,
Adrian, oh, I'm sorry.
are you?
No, that's like I say.
Okay, okay, wonderful. Any against? All right, thank you so much. Moving to director's report.
Great, thank you. Previously, we presented to Parks Board the community-initiated fundraising parks proposal process. It's now been approved by Deputy City Administrator Shemansky. And as you can imagine, the name was a mouthful, so we're renaming it. The new program will be called Fundraising for Park Improvements, much easier, much more clear. So this new structure for fundraising for park improvements retains the legacy park bench and rose bed giving programs. It adds new opportunities for individuals to donate towards new park amenities, as well as critical park system needs and large scale projects. So it has 4 different tiers, just sort of reminding everyone. Also, this process will be much more manageable than what we've done in the past. Just as a reminder, we sunsetted the program in 2019 because it was not manageable. And this new process, we believe, will be much more transparent in terms of engaging with community and having them get engaged in ways to raise funds for park amenities. We are planning to have a website go live by January 15th. So there'll be an opportunity for folks to see what's being made available. And of course, if anybody would like to receive some materials about the program in advance, I'm happy to share those with them. We chose not to do a full-on briefing today since you all have heard about it previously. Just wanted to give you an update that we're moving forward and we're really excited. Great. I know that we had some public comment around turfing at Powell Park. We did provide a response to each of the folks that showed up at the last month's meeting. And we just generally shared that we're welcome and willing to have a broader discussion with Cleveland High School parents and public schools about the possibilities for the site. And it is true the Deputy City Administrator's Office is in the process of scheduling a meeting with PPS. I imagine that one, the first one will be a one-on-one, but I'm sure that they'll be engaging with school community soon thereafter. My next update is around the Parks Levy. On November 20th, you may recall, I can't remember, we had our meeting before the 20th, right? On November 20th, City Council unanimously passed a resolution directing Portland Parks and Recreation to bring a levy referral in spring 2025 or earlier for the May or November 2025 ballot. Following that resolution, we held a briefing with Mayor-elect Wilson, who supports us moving forward with briefings for the new city council members during their onboarding. So we'll be working with Deputy City Administrator Sonia Szymanski and setting up briefings for incoming city council members over the next coming weeks. The other update that I have regarding the levy, we had one of the commitments that we made to voters was to conduct an independent audit of the Parks Levy. And while the final report will be issued later on this week, the consultant firm has notified us it will be a clean audit with no recommendations. So we're really pleased to share that. I'll just read a quote. The current draft report reads, "The audit found that levy funds were used in compliance with voter-approved commitments and that levy dollars were clearly tracked using strong financial systems and tracking mechanisms to ensure transparent management of funds. Portland Parks and Recreation developed and used a methodical model to ensure levy resources were used last as a supplemental funding source and employed an effective framework to operationalize day-to-day management of the levy. There were no recommendations." So congratulations and thanks to our levy coordinator, Claire Flynn, Sustainable Future Manager, Sarah Huggins, Finance Manager, Claudio Campuzano, and the Levy Oversight Committee for stewarding this important work with efficacy, transparency, and accountability. So really excited, perfect timing to get a positive audit as we start our conversation with the incoming council about renewing. So speaking of new council, the swearing in ceremony is Thursday, the 19th. It is invitation only. However, I believe it's being live streamed. So if we have information, we'll be sure to share that with folks. The council meeting cadence is different than what we've all been used to in the past. They're only designated to have full sessions the first and third Wednesdays and Thursdays of each month, along with whatever committee meetings they decide to create. In preparation for that, Parks we've been compiling potential future council items for the first 6 months, which is hard to do, but it's a good way to start, and I think it will help create a calendar and a schedule for the council to consider. Many things will continue to go to council for approval, but and a few things that will no longer be going. And things like that include contracts and IGAs, which are interagency agreements that are consistent with budget. So if it already exists in our budget, we will be bringing those. Sometimes they come up unpredictably. Accepting procurement bids will no longer go to council, and authorizing grant applications and acceptances, unless of course it amends the budget. So only a few items that are no longer going to council, and there'll be fewer meetings. So we'll see how that goes. And a reminder that Vibrant Communities Service Area has an onboarding work session with the council on January 16th and a land tour on the 17th. Those are still in formation and getting tighter and tighter. And I think in the next week or so, we'll have scripts and site stops that have been formalized. I know that Todd will be working with identifying some partners, right, that we might engage with as a part of the site tours. And I know that at our last meeting, Dr. Corbin talked about sort of your own annual report that will lay out priorities, well, accomplishments and priorities for the board, which will be then shared with the incoming council. I'm gonna pause. See if anyone has any questions.
Open the floor to the board.
Allison, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. More of a question about the content of the written director's report. First of all, thanks so much for the report. I'm always incredibly impressed by the amount of work that it's happening within the Bureau, and just fascinated by the wide variety of issues that arise and that are managed so well by all of the teams involved. I saw under the assets and development section that there's a section for the bond scoping program. And I was just curious to know what that is. Is that referring to an existing bond or planning for future bonds? This might just be a new kid question, but just curious to know more about that.
Not really a new kid question, and I'll ask Lauren came on camera, so she's obviously ready to answer that question.
Hi, Allison. I'm Lauren McGuire. Nice to meet you officially. Yeah, what we're doing is we're scoping for a future bond, which we hope will happen right after the levy, or maybe even at the same time. So that's just a plug on my part. So we have like $600 million in backlog, and so this was an effort to scope out the projects that we know are big problems, and we need a little extra time to really get a really good number on what that would cost. One example is like Southwest Community Center. It has a lot of issues, including leaking roofs and a lot of other things. And so that's one example of what we're working on. But yeah, we're starting that actually next week.
Thank you. That's great to know. I've been on the financial sustainability working group meetings with lots of talk about the referral for a new bond and a potential, referral for a new levy and a potential new bond coming next. So that's great to know that that's underway. And that's why that caught my eye in the director's report. Thanks again.
Thank you. A question. So what do we know about parks raising private funds through different mechanisms? That sounds fairly exciting, that opportunity, particularly to have people, leave monies in their will for the local park or what have you. I mentioned this kind of pluses and minuses. If people want to be recognized in some way, and is that appropriate and all. So I realize there'll be a lot more to come on this, but just wondering, some of the things you may have discovered so far about that. Are there other, models out there in the country that have been very successful with this? And
Well, there are a lot of models out there, and we're starting a little small. A portion of this project is actually a program that already exists, and that's our legacy bench program and rosebud program. The second part is also rather small. We have a registration software called ActiveNet, and in ActiveNet, there's actually a function where folks can make a donation online, and so we're going to create very specific assets, things like bike racks or garbage cans right? So you can't really identify where you're going to place these, but you can donate towards water source at a dog off leash area, something to that notion. The third piece is more about larger projects that are in alignment with projects that we're intending to do. So a couple of those examples are Friends of Mount Tabor Park are very interested in helping to raise funds to replace the shelter that was destroyed during the January storm. So that's one area. North Portland Little League is interested in improvements at University Park in North Portland, and that's an area that we've been looking at as well. So it's sort of identifying groups that are aligned with and interested in projects that we would like to raise funds for, so that we can sort of leverage each other's funds. Then the fourth piece is work that we already do with the Portland Parks Foundation. So the fourth parcel is like, or part is, and currently we're working on, it's called Everybody Plays, that we're working with Portland Parks Foundation, and we are partnering with them and a community on 3 playground renovations. So this will just be another mechanism for community members to identify projects that they would like to interest the foundation in, and they're generally gonna be a much larger dollar amount. We're trying really hard to keep it tight and not let it be sort of carte blanche that folks can just be like, well, we don't want to raise money for this, right? We really want to make sure that we're managing expectations, that we're funneling that excitement and focus towards things that we need and that we can manage, because it takes a lot of capacity to manage a development program. We've had one in the past, and since we've had the levy, we haven't had to have it, but there's still this huge interest for people to donate to our parks. So it's a little bit smaller scale, a little bit more focused. But I will say that we have had conversations about larger scale naming opportunities associated with large capital projects. The North Portland Aquatic Center is one of those things. I would love to, at some point, if we pursue a bond, the Delta Park sports complex is in dire need of quite a bit of capital improvement, and I think that there's a great opportunity for some strong corporate sponsorship if we were to go that route. So we have some grand ideas. We're not quite there yet, but this is a really good sort of start for us. Something that we can manage and that will benefit parks.
Oh, Chris, go ahead.
Different topic. As we are planning to enter a new long session and the governor's recommended budget just dropped, is the Portland Parks Bureau aware of any happenings in the advocacy or lobbying community of legislation or budget proposals that would impact the parks moving forward, that it would be helpful for the board to know about? I know it's really early on, but sometimes there's murmurings in the advocacy community.
I haven't heard anything about budget, but we have recently, as a bureau, opined on recreation immunity legislation through the Office of Government Relations. And I believe that there's also a housing.
Same as last legislative session about kind of middle income housing development in the state.
So nothing budget specific, but those 2 legislative items have popped in the last few weeks, and we've opined on the legislation.
And I think everyone probably knows this, but just to say it for everybody, we work through the Office of Government Relations. So we give comments from parks to them, and then they have a unified city message. So,
Any follow-up? Samara, go ahead.
can you speak a little more to the recreation immunity, what the request was? Do it a little bit. So in the state of Oregon, if you make your private or public land free and open to the public, there's recreational immunity. So if someone had like a trip and fall, for instance, on your property, you might still be sued, but you'd be able to use that in defense, and there might be a summary judgment right away in the lawsuit where the judge might just throw the case out because it was free and open to the public, took like reasonable messages there, or reasonable like use to like maybe walking or biking or something that was on your property. And yes, there was some cases that were on the coast where this was litigated, and I think they're trying to clarify that. And from our standpoint, we want as many private lands as well as our own city-owned lands to be free and open to the public and have some strong protections around recreational immunity, because if you kind of start to erode that, think of all the trails and other things, people start closing those off because they're fearful of the litigation. Likely that wouldn't happen to a city-owned park, but for all the connected tissue of all the private lands and everything, it could be a big deal. Thank you.
Other comments, questions? Any additions, Director Wong?
Thanks for the questions.
All right, thank you so much.
Thanks for reading the report.
Gonna be moving forward with the working group reports, starting with the Board Affairs Working Group. During this session, if you can also, if you have the wherewithal to talk about some highlights that you want to share, as well as any initiatives that you discussed in your working group meetings. Starting with the Board Affairs Working Group, which is Casey.
I have a minute.
We're gonna talk about this more, and we have a little bit more time because Jessica Green is not present, so we
Okay.
have some wiggle room. We have some time.
All right, well, actually, I was going to make a pitch. First up, I want to apologize for getting the wrong report into Michelle and getting you the right report, not until yesterday. The first thing that was a pitch, because we've got so many new board members we need to fill in for, we're going to start a nominating committee early this year. So if anybody wants to be on the nominating committee, please contact Corbin or myself. And other than that, if anybody's interested in, and I do appreciate everybody who made comments about changes to the bylaws. If anybody's interested in helping me revise the bylaws, I'd be really appreciative of that. Other than that, anybody has questions, that'd be great.
Thank you, Casey. Any questions from the board? Thank you. Moving to Land Use and Infrastructure Working Group, and it would be David or Matt. And I don't believe either one of them were here, and they didn't meet. Yeah, but I don't believe.
Yeah, I'm here. I mean, but I don't, can you guys hear me?
Sorry,
Yes.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but I don't have much to report. I think we did not have our meeting this month because it overlapped with Thanksgiving holiday. So we are going to reconvene again in, I think, January.
All right.
I don't even think we're doing a December one. Yeah.
Yeah, the timing, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, David. And moving to Financial Sustainability Working Group.
Yeah,
Casey here?
Director Long took most of the news in terms of what's going on. So I will simply note two things. The Parks is still working under the budget restrictions that the mayor's put in place presently, which is a 5 to 8% reduction of distribution from the general fund, which is going to hurt probably us more than anybody else. And that at the beginning of the levy, when it first came out, it looked like there would be funds that could fund it for an additional year, but that is now no longer true because of the shrinking tax base. So there is a need to make sure that we get the new levy up and going as soon as possible in order to allow it to dovetail into the expiration of the old one, as this basically supports about 1/3 of the operating costs of parks.
Thank you, Casey. Any questions? Great, moving to the Community Engagement Working Group.
Yeah, we have a few topics that already mentioned, addressed by Director Long, and Casey also mentioned something that overlap a little bit. But the highlight will be, we were focusing on how can the board help in terms of onboarding with the DCA, and then also with city council, mayor, and whether or not there can be a board representation at a tour on the 16th and 17th. I think someone is going to maybe circle back whether or not that was even possible, and maybe we'll just wait patiently and see what comes out of your findings. And then our other discussion was really focusing on preparing the annual report. I think that is already packaged on the way, and then want to make sure that we only focus, pick 3 or 4 hot topics, community outreach, survey, Harborton. In my notes it said urgent, so we have a letter, hopefully it looks very urgent. And then PSEF funding, I think that's all our topic during discussion. And then Dr. Corbin mentioned that it would be very good to have in our hands the maps of the 4 districts and the parks that actually is allocated to those 4 districts, so that it's presenting itself that is relevant to how the communication with the city council kind of at a glance as a visual thing. I think Director Long mentioned that there is something like that. It just needs to be made available for the community
I linked
engagement.
it in the email for the board packet, actually.
Okay,
So if you go in that, back to that email, there, I have a link that
Okay.
shows an interactive map of all our facilities.
I guess I missed it. And then other topic was looking at, again, Casey mentioned about the need to stagger members, new members on the board, and how we can bring them on board. Edges, you'll see exactly how many, a little bit confused, how many openings do we have? And what is the kind of window of opportunities to bring folks in onto the board? That's something I'm a little bit lost.
As of the end of this fiscal year, there will be 3.
And then there's a interest in finding someone who can come in halfway, so
Possibly.
yeah, okay.
You should
And
also say, if I can jump in really
Yeah.
quickly, if others are thinking about offboarding for whatever reason, if you can let us know as well, if you're planning on offboarding, meaning whether end of term or switching to another or focus. That way we can make sure we have that space open during the nomination committees, and we can make sure that we have enough candidates as we move forward. So I just want to put that in there.
yeah, the last item is there's a need to schedule a meeting with Amanda. I don't know if-
We have that on the calendar.
Thank you, that's all we have.
Thank you. And the next community engagement working group meeting should be this Thursday, correct? Because I don't have anything on my calendar. Meeting schedule.
That would be next Thursday. On the
Okay.
19th.
Thank you, Swin. Any questions from the board? Right, and then we have the recreation, arts, culture, and nature, which has not met yet, but Ally, is there anything that you would like to say and contribute regarding this
Just,
reformed working group?
just looking forward to getting that started in the new year.
Great, thank you so much. Great, I'm gonna move to kind of an exercise. And Director Long, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that the Portland Parks Board is moving into its 25th year in existence in 2025. So this annual report is gonna probably hold a lot of information. We wanna make sure it's not a tome, but more of an executive summary of what we've done from the summer, so from June 2020 or July 2023 to December of 2024. So it's a little bit more expansive than usual. And with that said, I think it's really important for us to have this discussion since we have the time. Last time, we've had a chance to really come together to discuss what we want to present was probably during the retreat. And so we have about 45 minutes to discuss how we want to situate the annual report with the understanding that we also want to advocate, educate, and provide information to the new council members. So I wanted to start off with that. The first part is kind of boilerplate, brief history, talking about some of the highlights that we want to put forth through the working groups. So if folks want to start sending that my way before January, so we can compile those and make sure that people get the recognition for the hours that you spend in the working groups, putting plans together and really advocating for parks at Portland. And I also want to really focus on in the second half, what funding information do we want to put up? What do we want to talk about regarding access? What do we want to talk about nature protection, infrastructure, as well as any other topics people feel that we need to include in the annual report? So I'm gonna leave it open. I kind of want free-flowing ideas right now. And again, for the working group chairs, if you can send me over your highlights as well as the initiatives that you're putting into place this year, so I can make sure that those are recorded in the annual report. So I'm opening the floor to the board for any questions or comments, suggestions, additions.
Dr. Corbin, do you want me to share the document outline on the
Yeah,
screen?
that'd be great. Sure, we have opinions what should and maybe should not be there. And the hope is to at least vote on some of this now. And then the hope is to, in January, to have a draft for everybody to read.
I had a quick question.
Yes,
Just curious to know if on the drive anywhere, there's a copy of a previous year's board report, or is this the same kind of format that has been used in past years?
last year's report was, I think, longer than usual. Michelle, do you have a couple of copies that you can send out to the board members so they have an idea of how the annual, maybe the last two annual reports? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
You talk about a lot of topics, and so this is the time to figure out what do we want to prioritize. Lynn, go ahead.
I guess I'm trying to look at it from the reader's perspective. And that will be the new city council, the new mayor. And I remember when I first came on board, there's so much I don't know about what Parks does. And so as I engage with the conversation, I found myself realizing so much Park is working on that I have absolutely no idea. And we take it for granted. I think as we always look at Parks and Rec, it's always the first thing came to our mind will be the green parks. Everybody knows that. But then there's so many other programs and asset and involvement, engagement, program, classes. We just thought that just comes somehow magically happens. And as I realized, the umbrella of Parks and Rec actually covers a lot. And I wonder, and also I'm so impressed with talking to staff. I felt like, but you guys are also graceful. It's like, oh, this is just, we're just doing our job. But then it reflects a lot of hard work, and yet our parks are clean. So how do you do that? So I wonder so-called the annual report is really part of that onboarding for the city council members and the new mayor. Is there a way that we can put in a little bit of, I don't know if previous annual report has infographics or whatever it's going to support. I think it will be really helpful, and maybe because I'm a very visual oriented person, it will be great to say, here's parks, and this part is that Green Wedge is our park in terms of land, but then there are also other real estate that we actually got our hands involved. Whether or not it's like a Chinese garden. I mean, parks have something to do with Chinese garden, but yet it's not like we going there to sweep the leaves. So maybe it can be broken down in a very simple way. At a glance, you realize we're dealing with a lot and doing really good work with very limited funding, and we still need a lot of funding to really uphold the quality that we would like to reach to. And reading the text will be fine, but then I think the visual representation can be very effective as we bring people on board who are focused on the east side, had no idea we're also doing that on the north Portland or west side. I think that will be very helpful as a true kind of effective annual report.
Thinking like a metrics snapshot with more graphics, so you can
Yeah.
kind of get the picture and then get into the meat of it.
Yeah.
With that said, I think what we probably need to discuss is like, at what scale? Because we're at the scale of the board, not at the park system. Because if I understand correctly, Director Long and staff will be presenting to the new mayor and city council, basically the full umbrella of Parks and Recreation. And what we're doing is presenting what the board does. And so how do we show our value as community members in the hours that we put in, and how we impact Parks and Recreation through education and advocacy? One of the things that we did discuss is we have been putting out letters. Do we include those letters? Do we include the links to Title 20 and other initiatives or other items that we have actually engaged in? And which ones do we want to highlight? So we don't have to take on the full park system as much as we need to highlight our value as the board. And as the government is in the process of being restructuring, how do we make sure that they realize that our value of the board, we're worth staying and supporting Parks and Rec, as well as Director Long and staff in doing the great work that you just mentioned. And so maybe it's easier not to think of it as this huge umbrella, but what is the work of the board? And what do we want to highlight? I hope that's helpful.
But we can also, but you could do some metrics with all like what's the community engagement group, kind of the metrics of what they're focusing on, just so there's kind of a graphic snapshot, and then you get into the.
I kind of do not know if it's still so effective to so-called separate the board from Parks and Rec. And I understand, Dr. Corbin, what you were just articulating, but I think.
It's not a separation, but it's more of a drilling down.
Right, I guess we as a board, we stay very high level of kind of view. But our view is to be able to see the vast kind of amount of responsibility the park has to deal with, and we provide some kind of advisory guidance. We don't deal with everything, but we need to recognize that view first. And I think it will be helpful to say our view of the park, we recognize this, and we are able to tackle how we can engage with Parks and Rec in a very optimizing our volunteer time into engaging in an effective way to provide advisory role. Because I just don't want to lose sight of, I don't want to keep saying our board, but I want to recognize the parks. That's why we are relevant. Without the parks, really irrelevant. So
I hear you, and I think thinking through this as an executive summary, so what is the important sort of bullet notes, information that we want to prioritize to say that the working groups are working on this through advocacy. These are the pressing issues that we were focusing on. This is the work that we've been doing as well. And again, because this is going to be compiled in January, this is an annual Parks and Rec board report. We need to figure out what we're prioritizing. So some of that information that you're talking about can be in a brief history. We can talk about what the purpose was and how it might have changed over the years, right? It's a briefing. They can find out more through a hot link within the PDF to go deeper into it. But almost like a cliff notes of the board's work and our position and our value and the work that we do. So I'm not saying no, but how do we organize it in a way that we were laughing about, that it doesn't become a tome, that they have a 250-page document that has everything in it. So how do we focus in and what do we want to focus in on?
doesn't that covered by the bylaw, the revised bylaw?
Yeah, some of this is gonna already be covered. But again, what do we want to prioritize? So one, do we want to highlight that we have a board that is representative of Portland because we're in all of the districts? Do we want to think about pretty much the second part, funding? What are the concerns that we have around funding? What are the sticky issues that we've talked about? What are the access issues that we've talked about? One, for instance, that comes to mind around access, we can think about access to programming. We can think about proximity to neighborhood parks. You can also think about public transportation and making sure that if you're taking public transportation, you can get to all of the resources within the public park system. So again, what are those things that we can follow up on? And Chris and then Samir?
We have a
I
couple
think we have all of
people,
them.
so-
Yeah. Do you want to
I can
call them
follow
out and then we'll come to Chris?
I'll
and
also
Samir?
mention for those in the room, Todd linked the annual report from previous year.
Thank you.
So if you want to look at it and see kind of what it looks like in the chat. Casey initially had his hand, but if your questions are answered, then I will let Aaron go next.
I'll let Aaron go next. Thank you.
Well, I just have a really quick one, and I don't know that it rises to the top for the annual report, but just being in my last year, so finishing up my 6th year on the board, we went from like having basically 0 public comment for almost, I don't know, four years or whatever it was, to now it seems like we've got somebody coming most board meetings, if not a few people. It's not a huge volume, but as a percent increase, it is, and so I don't know, just something that might be worth putting in there as we become more visible to people or accessible to people as a board.
Thank you, Aaron. Have another.
Matt?
Hey, everybody, my phone is dying, so I don't have my video on, but I like what what Aaron just said. I think highlighting how we serve as a conduit for public input, complementing the excellent work that Park staff does. So obviously the public comment period, but also attending sessions that Park staff does and outreach work around that. I think would be a great area to highlight.
Thank you. Who's next on?
And then, I don't know if Chris or Samir.
Chris and then Samir?
I don't have anything to add to the buckets that are in the outline. I think those are great. I do think that we maybe shouldn't put the whole letters in there. And if we just wanted to give an overview of the letters that we did write as an advocacy group, maybe like a paragraph each, but something you said about having the representation of different areas and different communities. that are representative of the city of Portland on the board is, I think, a really strong point, especially for new council members and the new council infrastructure. Because I will just say this as a board member, I think I'm not always contributing to a new advocacy letter that's being written, but a lot of the work that I do as a board member is also just those informal connections when I'm at dinner or with other community members that I'm teaching them and educating them about what the Portland Parks and Rec is actually doing in community and helping facilitate that conversation and hearing what their viewpoints are and talking through those things and how that community lens of conversation, how the board actually helps facilitate that more informal connection with community members. And yeah, even if it is just one person each board meeting, that is a lot better than zero. It's very, very hard to actually get formal public comment outside of city council meetings in kind of any government structure. So I think that does show that there's an openness and an open door, not just of board members, but also to the partnerships that Portland Parks and Recreation has outside in the community, especially with PPS and some of the other community organizations that utilize the Parks and Recreation centers. So that might be something to focus on and bring and like braid into the report for framing.
Thank you, Chris. Samir.
I want to highlight what Ali put in the chat. I was going to mention that I think it is helpful maybe as an appendix, the letters, and then maybe that's a good framing point in between the ones that are still pending. I wanted to just say I really like what you were saying, Chris, about like I talk to the volunteers and to parks rangers when I'm out Sunday Parkway, stuff like that, the park volunteers. And I think that that's something where it really does matter. I remember from the training when we were being onboarded to say like, I'm on the parks board and have people feel that connection. That was something that you all suggested from staff to new members, and it does help. And you learn a lot more because people share more than the sort of 2 sentences that they might if they're just a person. So that I think is something worth highlighting for the board. And then for the access, I would separate, and maybe this is just a semantical point, but it always comes across to me that programming is narrower than the broader recreation conversation, like access to community centers for drop-in things seems to get, that seems to be the difference. And so I'm not sure if that is the case or that's just how I interpret the words, but I would love to have access include the drop-in side of things too, not just the rest. I don't know if that's how it's intended, but yeah.
So access was just an umbrella. I was looking for specifics.
Yeah.
So that's a specific that I would include in there. And because access means many different things to many different people, right? It could be access to culturally relevant programming, park equipment. It could be, you can think about ADA access. And under that big umbrella of access, what are the things that we want to highlight? So
yeah, that one, and then the only other thing I'd mention is hours of operation.
Can you say more about that?
Sometimes it's hard to get to a community center during the hours it's open for the drop-in things. It all ties back to funding for the staffing. I'm sure that's the primary constraint, but being able to go to a community center after 5 o'clock on a Sunday would be nice, for example, and a lot of them close, at least the ones nearby where I live.
Great, I thank you for that. So again, these are broad strokes. If there's specifics that you want to tell city council or educate city council on things that we've wrestled with, this is where I would love to hear it so I can incorporate it into the annual report. Sue-Ann, go ahead.
Do we have place where we can mention, we actually have conducted several meetings in community centers, which I thought when the weather is nicer, I think we should kind of continue that. We will meet the board meeting at the community center if that's possible.
That might be something that we want to say that we want to do more, but I think the sticking point was the technology at the community center. So if there's something that we want to advocate for, is that we
And
want to
maybe
be out
we
in.
need money to have better systems.
I mean, it's something worth talking about, because if we can't have meetings in communities, that also means that communities can't rent out spaces
Yeah.
to have meetings in their community as well,
Because
right?
when community members show up at our meetings at the community center, I think it really helps. But if we're not going back there because of the technology, then that's a great reason to get more funding to take care of that. Another, I don't know if, do we have a data, you're just saying that this board also have representations from each district. And then so the city council members can see that, oh, we also have another ally or voice that they can associate with.
Yeah, on the ground, for sure. And I think when we talk about infrastructure and systems, we can also think about aging infrastructure such as HVAC systems that need to be replaced, repaired. These are the things that we can tell the new city council members coming in, is that please look at these things that can bring more value to Parks and Rec, to the community. So looking at this as advocacy and education. Other ideas, Chris, go ahead.
2 thoughts. I'm sorry for talking so much.
No,
In the
please.
infrastructure system support, we'll kind of have that intersection with climate change, is that with the backlog of maintenance, when people are utilizing the parks and recreation system for the cooling mechanism, or like the pool or the sprinklers and the water system, and the splash pads, if they're not fixed, but those are areas where people are going to look for relief in times of really severe warming, and for children and things like that, like there is a need there for the community member, and we've talked a lot about that as a board, for those maintenance costs. And the other thing that I was thinking about that we've also talked a lot about as a board and had discussions about is when there's those rolling brownouts, or when recreation centers need to be used as cooling centers, as warming centers, or for safe shelters if there's another severe weather pattern and it closes off programming and access to programming in those recreation centers. For that purpose, there is a need for the new city council members to really focus on what other intergovernmental supports and properties could be used for those purposes, so it doesn't shut down access to the community centers and recreation centers during those times, so that we maintain access and continued programming throughout those events while giving folks access to things that they need.
Thank you, Chris, I appreciate that. Like not shutting it down completely, but what does a hybrid model look like with intergovernment agencies supporting, not disrupting park and recreation programming? Patty, please go ahead.
What about the challenges of competing forces? You know, the pickleball, the dog park, the community gardens is becoming, that's a challenging thing that we should be advocating for, or somehow to deal with that.
Can you say more about that? Pickleball, dog park, and
community gardens,
basically how to share these resources.
Right, and with our assets, I mean, they're, how much can you cram into a, 2 or 3 acre park, or, this trails, walking paths.
Yeah, I would always say the kids are fine, they can always play together, it's adults that we have to watch out for. Right?
Skateboard parks, mountain bikes, scooters.
Yeah, I mean, especially, and I think this might be something to speak to the urbanization of Portland, as more and more people move here, as more people don't have backyards, that city parks become the only green space, recreational space for them to use. So what does that mean as far as maintenance? How do we share it? What does that look like? I'm writing all of this down. I'm going to do my best to put it into language, not to overwhelm, but And again, I don't think this is unique to Portland, but it's something that we definitely need to wrestle with as a city. And my question would be, as a board, how do we advocate, or what do we advocate for? How do we want to inform city council of these tensions within our park system? Not in a way to complain, but maybe some solution based, or we would love to be in conversation with you to maybe close some of these gaps around access and resource sharing within Portland. Thank you. Do we have a hand up?
Matt has his hand up.
Matt, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to build on that comment Patty made, and for me, access is about creating additional facilities as an existing park infrastructure, but I think I'd also like to highlight just are there gaps in terms of creating new opportunities and new park spaces, new green spaces in areas that are growing or underserved. And so I know park staff doesn't have capacity to proactively develop those opportunities. And is that a place that maybe more resources, that space that they could be playing in?
Patty, go ahead.
What about the impact of climate change? For example, our storms are becoming more severe, where we have 100 trees fall over, and how that impacts maintenance of a park and creates challenges.
Yeah, I think one of how we want to craft that conversation around funding, because it's building new parks, but also maintaining and fixing aging infrastructure, and older infrastructure as well. Any ideas of how you might want to, not spin, I don't want to say that, but how do you want to communicate that?
Well, there's maintaining, and then climate impact is things are more, we have storms where a couple trees fall, but now we have storms where 100 trees fall. And so how do we deal with that? Because I don't think I think it's going to be worse. And so how can we deal with that as a park system? Because that's going to take funds away from creating parks and maintaining.
Thank you. Director Long, thoughts on some of the comments that were, because you're going to be also presenting on parks, and so maybe helping us focus in might be helpful during this time. I'm hearing a lot of
Well, what I'm hearing a lot of is some identifying challenges and opportunities that frankly tie back to resources. I mean, across the board, basically. And so I think that this document should be very explicit in that regard. And then when it comes to things like climate, I would challenge the board to think beyond potential tree impacts. And I mean, we're there's some touching on it in terms of like increased heat and increased cold and the impacts, and how our community centers, our pools, our splash pads are all being overly prescribed as a solution. It's really, quite frankly, a bit of a Band-Aid. And our infrastructure is in dire condition. So like, I mean, we've opened up community centers where the air conditioning's actually failed, right? Like, so, if we're gonna be talking about climate, I would just like try to be as broad about that and maybe less specific, but and then I think about how parks could contribute to mitigating the impacts of climate. In the additional tree planting that is happening. about, watershed, floodplains, and thousands of acres of natural areas that are within parks are providing such incredible environmental services to the city and mitigating climate. And I think people kind of forget about it, except for a few of us who, it keeps us up at night.
So highlighting the ecosystem services provided by parks.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And this is more my personal experience with the board, with the financial sustainability working group, and then also the Parks Levy Oversight Committee. It's an opportunity for us as staff to almost practice and have more of a dialogue around the level of service and the financial condition, and develop materials that then we go to other groups and use those same materials again and again and again. So League of Women Voters, we did a session, but we try out all that stuff with the Parks Board Financial Sustainability Working Group first. So it's almost like you're our previewer for the community before we take materials out oftentimes. And I don't know if that's how beneficial that is for you. Like you're kind of seeing behind the curtain, but it's super beneficial for us. It makes us, I think, more refined by the time we're in a broader public audience or at council.
So we kind of serve as a bit of a focus group.
For sure. We're doing that every month. We're kind of practicing, sharing ideas, sharing messages, and then we're getting your feedback real time that didn't work or does.
All right. Thank you for that. So that's important for everybody to also recognize that, the advocacy, but also the advice that the board provides in the earlier stages of processes helps parks out. So I make sure that.
And that was one example, but Title 20 on the rules change and the code updates we did for the Park Ranger program. We had multiple iterations with the Parks Board that helped us finally get it to, City Council, and it was more refined because we did that, for sure.
Great, thank you. And a lot of us have probably served on committees outside of a Parks Board, but adjacent to it, as well as I think we actually did some, not surveys, but doing some focus groups as well in parks and being on the ground. So it's important to say that we're not just here talking and navel gazing, but we're out in the community doing the work as well. And we have some wonderful swag now with t-shirts that we can go out there. And I believe badges are on the way at some point. So it's good to highlight that we're actually engaged in community and the work that we're doing, as well as maybe highlighting a couple of these things that we wrestle with that we can put in a good work for parks, with the understanding that they're going to also be presenting. So we don't have to say everything, but again, what are the things that we want to make sure doesn't get lost or is not said? That's important to us as we move forward as a board. Thoughts? Additions?
Director Corbin, I can also make a list of all the various things that were on the agendas in the past year. As far as
That'd be great.
all
Thank
the
you.
different presentations and external contacts you have, like with the county or with
Perfect. Thank you so much. So let's just do this. Let's go through each one of these and see if there's anything that we want to make sure that gets said. So funding. What do we want to communicate around funding? Besides that, we need more of it. And like yesterday, which is all true.
We outline what we deem as a priority, like.
Yeah, please.
Like infrastructure, I mean, can't be a cooling center if your air conditioning breaks down. Can't have a swimming pool if it's.
No technology.
Yeah, technology or some, so that there's a, we create some list.
So I have Wi-Fi, I have as well as cooling and warming, the HVAC. which sounds like this would be good for PSAP, just saying. What are other funding conversations we want to have? Because we talked about levy, we talked about the park district.
Give kudos to the parks, like they're using the levy funds the way that they should. They're using them really effectively and efficiently. When there's funds brought to the Bureau, they can use it to deliver the clean audit on that. So there should be continued investment. There needs to be a focus on getting the levy on the ballot and then focusing then on the bond as well, bond scoping.
Thank you.
We have Ally, Casey, and then Samir.
All right, go ahead. Ally.
Yeah, I think for funding, to me, there are certain times when it's really important to echo what Parks is saying, and funding is a big one where we can be sort of that additional voice that is having them hear the same thing, because they're going to be hearing a lot. So I would love to see what how Parks is positioning the need for funding and be able to work with that just in terms of how we want to position it to City Council. So that would be my preference. I think we can, naming some of the smaller things. I'm wondering, I think staying big picture, and you can say sort of, some examples of where it's gone wrong in terms of funding and what hasn't been possible or what the challenges have been. But yeah, I would really like to see what Parks is putting together on funding needs for City Council and be able to give a very shortened version of that from us so that we're amplifying that message. Yeah.
Thank you, Ally.
Casey was next.
Is it Casey? Casey, go ahead.
Yeah, I think funding kind of goes back to the broad strokes I think you were trying to avoid, but I'm going to talk about anyway. That the theme of the letter should be twofold. One is that, as you've said many times, Dr. Corbin, parks and parks programs should be considered more as an importance as utility to the citizens of the city than it simply as an asset, an add-on. And if taken from there, because part of this is an advocacy letter, and part of it is making sure that attention and resources are going to be favored to parks and parks programming, and making sure that that importance is shown to the new City Council people that are coming in. So, you need to talk about, you need to have that theme of the letter in order to express the importance of funding. And then you have to deal with the tension between operational funding and maintenance funding, capital maintenance funding, and how difficult that's been in terms of dealing with in the Financial Sustainability Committee meetings, in these hearings, as well as what, Director Long and Todd have to deal with when they go in front of City Council. Then, in addition to that kind of smaller things, is other sources of funding. We've talked about, especially Suen, how can we get more private funding going on? And it's great to see what's been presented by Director Long today. And then lastly, thoughts about how to change the rules around SDC funds so that they can be released to something other than significant new capital maintenance, but existing capital projects in the area of the construction. That's something that we've been thinking about. So those are some of your specifics that you may want to raise.
Thank you for that, Casey. Very helpful. Samir, go ahead.
Just a clarifying question. I know that in the past it wasn't necessarily important to differentiate, but because of some of the things that Director Long mentioned earlier, is the audience for this the City Council only or also the mayor?
I believe it's the mayor and City Council. With the new government structure, has that changed?
I think it's both.
Yeah, I think it's both. And we don't know how committees will continue to function under the new City Council, but until such time as anything changes, my recommendation would be that the audience is both. And you know, of course, keeping in mind the roles and responsibilities, but I honestly, I think that the approach and the messaging could be the same.
That helpful, Samir?
Yeah, thanks.
Adrian?
And just, this really just builds on what others have said, but, you know, to make sure that we talk about prioritizing a sustainable funding model. I think this chasing our tails every 5 years with a levy is probably what got us into this, sort of the maintenance hole. That's so much attention, you know, that has to be paid to the, you know, scrambling for the next operating dollars. And so I think, you know, it's fair to say that, you know, the Portland public wants a more sort of responsible, sustainable model and not let things fall into disrepair as they have. So, you know, supporting Parks and Rec and continuing to look for what that solution would be.
So asking council to support, that's what I'm hearing, is like speaking to the lack of funding, but also asking city council and the mayor to support system or new ways of funding and find new ways of funding for parks. So I think we need to be able to hold both. Lynn, go ahead.
I think the city council and mayor will be hearing from every bureau saying, we got funding problem. And there's something to say about as we grow with more asset and program. I remember a few board meetings ago mentioned something about the fact that when we have, let's say we built a new aquatic center, can we build it also with a built-in kind of maintenance kind of budget and all that? So as these facilities, they all need maintenance, and when they age, there's already a built-in type of funding. And I forgot who mentioned it, maybe it's Director Long. There was a comment about the fact that that is in need of going to Salem to change a certain way of how we actually have be able to get funding allocated for capital investment. I didn't get it correctly at that time, but then it seems like we have a system here where if we build something new, we are right out of gate, we're gonna be behind on maintenance very soon because there isn't this kind of set aside. And so I mean, we recognize that, but then yet we keep bouncing our head within that confines, like where can we get more money? We can support the parks' interest in trying to be able to optimize how we work with funding we have. But then when the rest of the cities in the state would say we don't support park district, it's kind of out of our hand to say, well, that's one way to be able to have funding. So I think this board is interested in also a more creative way of being able to capture ways to not just keep throwing money and fixing things that fall apart, but we also want to be very smart about the kind of sustainable future, right? How can we, and I think you all work so hard to find that way, and yet what is the roadblock here? Because the city is saying no, and then are we just stuck, or what are the tools that the board can advocate so that we get city council and mayor say, let's have a different conversation here. Because every bureau needs money, and what is going to differentiate us. Can we show all the creative ways how other city we have been referencing that we want to do that too, and where are our roadblocks? We're just not just asking for money, but we're also trying to find solutions.
I would just reference we've had 2 or 3 different alternative funding task forces that we put together. Wherein many board members participated over the last 4 or 5 years, and we have identified multiple potential alternative funding sources, and for one reason or another, they were rejected by council at that time. We had almost a list of 10 different ideas that we pursued and did a lot of research on. So it's not a foreign concept by any stretch of the imagination, but every council, it is their right to weigh these options, and they gave us in 2000 a direction that they wanted us to pursue, and that was the levy. So I think that we still have those sort of back of pocket if a future council was interested in considering including the district idea. And I think I think you were, Sue, and I think you were getting towards this when you were talking about capital projects and then not having what we call O&M to support them. And I think that including that as under funding makes sense. We don't always get the associated operations and maintenance funding when we build new projects, and that's a problem. So maybe including that as a part of the funding.
What's stopping us?
If I can, I just want to make sure I get it. What is the? The council, I heard council, it's O&M, is that what you're calling?
Operations, maintenance.
It's basically, the funding that you need to keep the lights on and buy the chlorine and so we don't always get the associated O&M or as much as we need for new facilities. And then we end up sort of cannibalizing the budget that we already have and spreading it a little bit thinner.
Can we, when we build, let's use the aquatic center. If we have $100 and we say this is $100 project, and can we just say, okay, let's build $75 worth, and then we save $25 for O&M. Are we allowed to do that, or as soon as you say you put things for O&M, you don't have, we don't have that privilege to say we can set things aside, we have to use all $100.
They're just different funding sources.
Well, I mean, technically you could do that, right? Set that money aside and put in a trust fund and carry it over to the next year. But like the real politics of local governance to date, we have a new council starting in January, is that bureaus that are better funded then receive general fund. If they're getting general fund, they get general fund cuts. And those resources are reallocated within the city's portfolio. And so that's why Olympia and Seattle ended up creating parks districts. So you could have longer term predictability on the services that are being provided and how they're going to be funded. However, that puts parks and recreation, right, in a constrained environment, and then you manage to that over time. Versus like, we benefit by being part of the city of Portland. We're getting for $140 million from Portland Clean Energy Fund for trees. We're getting another 20 million plus for other things that are related to parks and recreation. If this was an independently governed district that had not the city council as its board, but some like Bend that has its own elected officials, not city council members, maybe it doesn't get clean energy funds. I mean, these are the choices for a council of how do they want to manage the parks and recreation system. voters can put in voter initiated ballots, right? So you can have a signature process, right, to put things on ballot. But we as city staff don't do that. It's not our job.
Little follow-up, the general public don't know this level of slice and dice. And
Right.
so the general public only perceive, oh, parks, you don't know how to manage your money because obviously you don't know how to do it, and that's why you have this maintenance backlog. And it's very hard to get the appreciation from the others to realize it's not what you don't want to spend the money to fix. It's just because of the funding sources. It's
And priorities.
right, and so we have a little bit like that, 3 people at the city council. It's basically just say, Parks, you don't know how to use your funding, which is really unfair, but on the spot, you cannot defend. But then that becomes a general perception, which to me, I think it's a very important issue that we need to tackle is to be able not defend how the way we run the finance, but it's you doing what you can within those kind of silo of funding. But how can, it's almost like a public image or a PR, and hate to use that word, but it is unfair when they come back and slap in your face and say, you don't know how to do it. You try it. It's not
You're doing the best with the constraints placed on you. And I think it's important to, if I can dovetail with what you're saying, is that a lot of times we have one-time money, and it's like we have to use this one-time money, right? But the precarity over time means that whatever shiny new asset or facility, what have you, which people love to take pictures in front of, that is going to be prioritized over the unsexy. We fixed our pipes and all of our toilets for it. Like, you don't want, nobody's gonna try to, be pictured in front of that. But that's a super important maintenance infrastructure issue that provides a quality of life for residents, but it's not sexy. And so how do we manage that? But the one-time funding comes at the cost of deferred maintenance over decades. And so maybe speaking to that narrative under funding and looking at, from what I'm hearing from everybody, giving Parks and Rec more leeway and space to be more creative in bringing in funding to fix the facilities and maintain them and possibly grow them. That's what I'm hearing.
You have Matt.
Yes, go ahead.
Matt, we currently can't hear you if you're speaking.
right now, batteries.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear us, Matt?
Just so folks know, I put in the chat much as what's being discussed, like the history of sustainable future and the research we've done with ballot measure groups. That's on that link there. If people want to read more about it.
And I'll just add to like what you were saying, Dr. Corbin. I'm reminded of when I worked in New York City, we had a commissioner who was sort of infamous for acquiring as much property as he possibly could. Like, he didn't care, it was under a bridge, a highway over underpass, like he just snatched up whatever property was available. And his mindset was, we'll figure out what we'll do with it later. We'll clean it up later. Well, like, because land is at such a premium in New York City, and some people really were opposed to that approach because it felt wasteful and frivolous. And then others, thought, oh, this is genius, it's innovative. They then converted the largest landfill in the country to a park. Like, that's happening. And, and he had the wherewithal 30 years ago to be like, yeah, we'll take that, So it's a difficult place to be in. And I think urban parks across the country are dealing with that and making trade-offs about how to use the funds that they do have access to. And there's a lot of conversations about lifting restrictions and finding more flexibility within those funding sources. We've certainly talked about the potential of using some portion of the levy funds towards some capital, right? So I think the creativity, but also like the flexibility, right? I think that's, I think that would be helpful to include. But also, like, let's keep in mind, like, we can do all that. We're doing that research, we're doing the, we're bringing together people to have conversations about it. It is the city council who makes decisions about what we pursue. And so I think, the letter should ask for support and innovative thought and, right?
Taking the long view.
Right, like long view, like what are we gonna do differently to make this work? Because we're trying everything and, we keep on having to come back every 5 years. And there are cities out there who are really cobbling it together in terms of different funding sources. And so we're not atypical by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, we're probably I'd say proportionally, like, with deferred maintenance is a problem across the country. The newer the system, the less of an issue it is, but most of the systems that are 75 years plus are dealing with the same.
We're about 100 years out of
Yep.
the playground movement,
Yep.
so that's when a
Well,
lot
the
of things are new.
WPA era, any
Yeah.
large old city is in the same exact state.
Absolutely.
Where they built a lot in the 40s and now everything's falling apart.
Yeah, unfortunately. I think the other thing to take into consideration is, and I've said this before, so you can stop me if I'm repeating. If I said this already today, I don't think so, but because we're allowing for backyards to be turned into ADUs, means that even more people won't have backyards. It'd be less green space, be less space for recreation, less space dedicated to ecosystem services. And so bringing that narrative into a changing and I would say the densification of Portland is an important conversation along with the long view. I think the other thing that we did talk about with the community engagement working group and possibly with the Board Affairs working group is that even though we have these districts, the districts are not necessarily going to have everything that every other district has. And so, just kind of pivoted a little bit around access. You need to think about access at the park level, like the full system level, access regionally, right? Because not every district might have a pool. And as a person that likes to do archery, I know their archery ring is not going to be at Unthank Park. It's not going to happen, even though that's close to me. And so how do we also think about these different levels of access? Not just what's in your neighborhood, but those more, the pools, the bigger facilities that we can ensure, or we can try to ensure, which is outside of Parks and Recreation's realm, of how do we talk about intergovernmental or interbureau connections, public transportation or other things that we can ensure that park access is for everybody and not just for those few that happen to live in the neighborhood that have these particular facilities. So things to talk about along with disability access and all those different ways that it needs to show up and we need funding to make those possible for everybody to have access to the park system and not just what's in their, within a 10-minute walk or roll from their residency. So I just want to throw that out there.
Matt, did you want to try again? Need to unmute first.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh my God, it's not a day for me in technology. Sorry about that. So I imagine every department is going to be heading up council and making their case for why they should be funded robustly. And I'm curious for park staff, what is it that historically has resonated with council and the mayor in terms of why this department, and I don't want to make a zero-sum game, but like what is most compelling? Is it the economic spinoff? Is it how Portlanders and surveys respond to this particular piece of city infrastructure? Like, what is it that we can highlight that in our letter that historically has resonated, if there is anything, a sort of through line?
I think the community. Oh, silence.
I'm just like, we have 12 new council members that have their own frame, so not just they're looking backwards is the answer, but. I mean, we had a Parks levy in 2020 where we had laid off 1,000 positions, 750 people, and everything was closed. That was a pretty unique environment to go to voters to ask if they wanted to reopen them, and they said yes. And the last time we had ballot measure before that was 2014, and it was for $68 million. Before that, it was 2002. And after we passed the 2014 bond, like PPS has passed over $2 billion worth of bonds, while we've done 68 million. So I'm not sure looking backwards is the answer if you're looking for a sustainable future answer, because we have not been on a sustainable future path.
Opportunity to present a vision of what could be.
Yeah, and it's, like we have big aspirations in Portland, is my personal commentary about green space and parks and recreation, small p, small r, parks and recreation. And the amount of resources that we've invested is not in alignment with those aspirations, and they haven't been for a long time. So at some point, for those of us that are trying to manage the system, those need to come into alignment so we can be straight with, like you said, the people that aren't following this closely, so they really understand what they're gonna get. Okay. So they really understand, versus like these aspirations up here where everyone feels good about, and they don't understand why they still don't have neighborhood park.
See, I read that link that you talked about, the sustainable future link. I read that. I thought, I appreciate that, but how many out there went in there and looked it up and read it?
Yeah, for sure.
And if our letter can just be able to capture a little bit of, there's a little bit of emotional tug when they read it. I thought, I mean, if they can just feel how you feel when you're dealing with the challenge, how we feel the frustrating aspect of not being able to really like let this great hero to soar. And I think not looking backward, I think you have to be very strategically what will be cited that's from the past to show the effort, the relentless effort. And because we can see how great it can be. And meanwhile, we're holding everything together and not fall off. If we can just capture, even if we only have 5 pages or 3 pages, we can capture that. It really depends on how much time they are willing to read. And if we can capture that little emotional tug, first page, we got a winner. Because beyond that, if they don't go through the first page and get that heartstring tug, then it doesn't matter how many 50 pages we have back there.
It won't be 50.
That's not gonna happen. The last report was 7.
I think with some of the links that they can do some digging on their own is important, but I hear that the narrative needs to be there. Needs to be there. So even though the letter is to the mayor and city council, it is a public letter. And if folks are willing to read it and, you know, and get inspired to support parks, we're also doing our advocacy job at different levels.
Does Michael Jordan know anything about this, or, I mean,
He's well briefed.
oh yeah.
It's the public that needs to know the tensions. Especially since we've gotten a lot less funding over the last few decades. I mean, I think this is across parks, you know, I won't go into a neoliberal term or what have you. But yeah, if they keep on giving us the same amount of money over 50 years, it's not the same spending power. So there's a slow drain of funding that may not be recognizable to the public, other than through not having access to some of the programming or the maintenance issues that we clearly see and understand today. So any other thoughts? Because in about 4 minutes, we'll be opening it up for public comments.
Matt said in the, sorry. Matt said in the comment, isn't PBOT going to make a similar statement? How is Parks differentiated? That was.
Yeah, for sure. PBOT has public infrastructure challenges just like we do. They're a little different and they're not as general fund dependent. So, but like the gas tax, you know, more people get more efficient cars or electric cars, so less gas tax. So it's a little different dynamic, but they have big public infrastructure challenges. And that's true for the whole city government, right? The Water Bureau's got, I don't know what it is, $2 billion water filtration plant going on. Columbia wastewater treatment plant needs to be redone. BES is working on that, but that's paid by rates, right? So that's gonna show up on our water and sewer bills. But that's a real cost to people that live here, just like a property tax would be, so.
Another cost.
Yeah.
And you can just do property taxes hikes for so long before people get really angry about that. Usually get angry the first time, but yeah. So how do you put it in different ways? Appreciate that. Adrian.
Well, I was just gonna say, I like that question earlier about, okay, everyone's gonna be coming in and, you know, with the woe is me and asking for more money and money is short and so forth. And, you know, how do you distinguish yourself? And, you know, I mean, to me, the reason for this government shakeup is that people felt that things were not working, you know, and they want things to work. But it's not like we only want things to work, we want the vibrancy back, right? So there's the sort of woe is me and infrastructure aspects of what Parks needs to do, but they've really, along with whole vibrant communities area, they've really got that angle on, where the vibrancy is gonna come back. So I think coming in with a strong positive vision as well as a woe is me is gonna be a good better sale to new people, you know, who are not that experienced, you know. And if it's all woe is me, it's gonna be, you know, hard to hear. It's gonna be hard to hear. So anyway, just some community thoughts about that, you know.
And I think we need to highlight the uniqueness of what Parks and Recreation is. This is where people meet their neighbors and build community. It's a free third space for people that hang out. Not to say anything about, you know, roads or anything like that, but you're not gonna be hanging out on the road, right? That's not where people play. That's not where people commune. And usually not.
I was about to say.
Sometimes it happens. be careful, folks, right? But the uniqueness of keeping the parks free and open, and as a community resource, particularly for particular populations, residents, and community members, these are the only places where they can get together, you know? So I think we do have something unique to talk about. Water is important as well, but I think the space of parks is something that we can kind of drill down in our narrative as something unique and worth investing in. And unfortunately, I think people have taken parks for granted and don't realize how much work it takes to maintain them and have them. And so I'll make sure that that gets focused on as well. Because public spaces are the only spaces you can go to when because private spaces are not gonna let you hang out, right? So making sure that we speak to the specialness of parks and recreation as well as the work that we do. I'll make sure that that gets weaved through the narrative. And I want to thank everybody. We're at 6:46. I want to thank everybody for your contributions. If you have any other thoughts about what should be included in the annual report or any language that you think or topics that you want to speak to, please send them my way, CC Alley. I'm going to open it up unless there's anything else, board members. Patty, go ahead.
Maybe the lead off should be how we've been fiscally responsible, because I think that's, you know, we've we've used the levies and all the prior funds, you know, in our audit. I mean, I think that's, people know where, you know, because there's been other complaints in other departments where it doesn't appear that they've been so fiscally responsible. So, you know, kind of pat ourselves on the back saying, when we ask for it, we use it like we said we were gonna use it.
We're good for it.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Patty. Definitely.
There was no one online for public comment.
Right, but there is an announcement from Samir.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
so this is new business? Yeah, so I just wanted to announce that due to my election as a member of the incoming city council taking office on New Year's, I have to resign from the Parks Board. And so this will be my last meeting as a member. I didn't mention it last meeting because the election wasn't certified. Before that, I couldn't as a candidate. But I just wanted to say two things. First, some thanks, Michelle in particular, for welcoming me, onboarding me, and Director Long as well for helping me be a part of this for the short time I've been able to be. And thanks to the whole team at Parks for what you do as staff for one of our most important bureaus in the city. I'm grateful to Parks Commissioner at the time, Dan Ryan, for the nomination, and along with one of my predecessors as a Parks Board member, Alana Pertle-Guiney, he will be one of my soon-to-be colleagues and district representatives for District 2, which is North and Northeast Portland. To all of you colleagues, I appreciate you. You'll always be able to reach out to my office. In both my previous job as advisory boards and commissions manager and here as a member of one of those, I appreciate volunteers and what we do, what you do so much. You will have multiple new council members in January for whom advisory board policy proposals and feedback are a core part of how we develop individual views on issues. And that's really exciting. And I'm definitely one of those. And finally, thank you to all the dedicated community members, including the foundation folks who make their voices heard here and around the city of Portland's government. I'm excited to remain a Parks champion in the new role. And specific to that, I love the free third space comment. That's a core part of stuff I want to work on, along with recreation, sustainable funding for, in particular, maintenance, and integrating parks into our understanding of not only as an asset or as a utility or as a nice to have, but as also a core part of public safety for the city. I think that's an under explored part of the story that I'm personally very excited about to nerd out on and then to work on. So just wanted to say that. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Samir.
Thank you.
And congratulations. I think that we're ending on a good note. If there's no other comments or questions, I'm gonna go ahead and adjourn.
What's your little thing?
I know, I don't have.
I forgot to bring it up, sorry.
I don't have my thing, but Thank you, folks.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Happy
Happy
holidays.
celebrate. See you in 2025.
See you folks. Thank you.
Bye.